The wind rolled gently through the Tennessee park, carrying the scent of pine and old memories. Late afternoon sunlight stretched long across the ground, scattering golden leaves over the paved path where Staff Sergeant Elijah Moore walked in silence. His uniform, pressed to perfection, shimmered faintly beneath the fading sun, the signature dark blue of the Tomb Guard. Even off duty, Elijah moved like a soldier on watch, straight-backed, precise, and quiet. He was returning from a memorial event nearby, his mind still heavy with the words of the fallen. As he passed an empty playground, he saw an old man sitting on a park bench, trembling. His faded green jacket bore a patch with the words, "Vietnam Veteran -1969. The man's hands shook as he tried to open a small pill bottle. Several tablets had fallen to the dirt. Elijah slowed, instinct pulling him closer. "Sir, you okay?" The man looked up, his eyes watery and unfocused. They left us out there," he mumbled, staring into nowhere. "I can still hear the choppers." Elijah recognized the signs immediately. PTSD flashback. He knelt, keeping his tone steady and low, the way soldiers talk to soldiers. "You're safe now, Sergeant. You're home. Let's get you some water, all right?" The man blinked and nodded slowly, his breathing uneven. Elijah helped him stand. His name tag read Earl Hopkins. A few teenagers nearby stopped to watch. One of them snickered, whispering, "Yo, that dude's harassing some old guy." Another took out a phone, recording. Elijah ignored them, focusing only on Earl. "We'll get through this, sir. Just breathe with me." He guided Earl toward the bench again, steadying his arm with both hands. But from a distance, to a bystander's eyes, it didn't look gentle. It looked like a struggle. The way Elijah's gloved hand held Earl's arm, the sternness in his military posture, it all seemed too forceful, too formal. Someone shouted, "Hey, leave that old man alone." Earl flinched. The tension snapped through the air. Elijah turned his head slightly. "I'm helping him," he called back. But his voice carried the firm command tone of a soldier, not the soft tone of a civilian. Minutes later, sirens pierced the calm evening. Two police cruisers rolled up. Lights flashed red and blue over the golden park. Elijah gently set Earl down and raised both hands, stepping back slowly. "Officers," he said, "there's been a misunderstanding. This man, hands where I can see them." One officer barked. Elijah froze. His training told him to stay calm, comply, and de-escalate. He glanced toward Earl, who was now visibly shaking, frightened by the lights and noise. "I'm Staff Sergeant Elijah Moore, United States Army," he said clearly. "This man's a veteran having a PTSD episode. I was helping him." The younger cop looked skeptical. "That uniform's fake?" Elijah blinked, surprised. "Excuse me?" "I said, you impersonating a soldier? You can't wear that." The absurdity hit him like a slap. The badge, the gloves, the insignia, each one earned with years of sweat and silence at Arlington National Cemetery. The old guard didn't raise their voices, didn't argue. They endured. He spoke evenly. "Sir, this uniform is real. I've served 8 years guarding the tomb of the unknown soldier." The cop's hand went to his taser. "Step away from the veteran now." "I already did," Elijah replied. His hands remained up, palms open. Then Earl stumbled, trying to stand, reaching for Elijah. Reflex took over. Elijah moved forward instinctively to steady him. The officer thought he was lunging. A click. A spark. The taser fired. Earl gasped and fell to the ground beside Elijah. For a heartbeat, everything froze. The old man's pill bottle rolled into the grass, spilling white dots across the earth like snow. Elijah gritted his teeth through the shock, forcing himself not to move. "He's hurt," he shouted, his voice strained but controlled. "You hit him." The senior officer rushed in. "Cuff him." As Elijah lay face down, feeling the cold steel tighten around his wrists. His gaze met the trembling eyes of Earl Hopkins. The old man whispered, barely audible, "Don't blame them, son." The park went silent except for the hum of the cruiser's engine and the rustle of fallen leaves. Elijah exhaled slowly. He had stood watch through blizzards and storms, through nights so silent that even the dead seemed to breathe. But this moment felt heavier than any funeral he had ever guarded. The hum of fluorescent lights echoed through the narrow hallway as Elijah was led inside the county jail. The cold concrete walls felt almost alive, pulsing with whispers, laughter, and the clang of metal doors. His wrists were still cuffed, but his posture remained steady. He walked as he always had, measured, upright, precise. "Sit here," the deputy ordered. Elijah obeyed, taking a seat on the metal bench. Across from him, two men watched, one young and restless, another older, quiet, his eyes heavy with time. The older man tilted his head slightly. "You military?" he asked, his voice deep, cracked like gravel. Elijah nodded once. "Yes, sir. Active?" "Old Guard, Arlington." The room seemed to pause. The older man straightened, eyes sharpening. "Tomb Guard?" "Yes." The old man let out a long exhale. The younger inmate laughed. "What's that? Some kind of museum security?" The old man shot him a glare. "Boy, shut your mouth. Those men guard the unknown soldier, rain, snow, day and night. They don't blink." The younger man rolled his eyes, but Elijah didn't react. He simply looked down at his gloved hands, faint marks from the cuffs on his wrists. "I was helping a veteran," he murmured, half to himself. "They thought I was hurting him." The old man leaned forward. "That happened out there today?" "Saw it on someone's phone already. People don't see straight anymore." Elijah gave a faint, almost invisible smile. "Maybe I still move like a soldier. Too rigid for civilians." "Rigid's not bad," the old man said quietly. "It's called respect." A pause hung in the air. Somewhere down the hall, a door slammed. An officer passed by, whispering to another, "That's the guy from the park video." The words carried like smoke. The young inmate snickered again. "Congrats, soldier. You're famous." Elijah stayed silent. Inside, he replayed every second of the incident. Earl's trembling hands, the flash of the taser, the look of confusion in the officer's eyes. He felt no anger, only an ache that reached somewhere deeper than pride. The old man spoke again, softer now. "You know, my brother was buried at Arlington. Died in Korea. Every time I visited, I saw you boys marching. I always wondered, what kind of man chooses to stand watch like that?" Elijah looked up. His gaze was steady but distant. One who believes silence can honor the dead more than words ever will. The old man nodded slowly. "Then don't lose that silence." Even here, the cell door clanged open. A sergeant stepped inside. "Moore, you've got visitors." Elijah stood immediately, instinctively adjusting his posture. Chin up, shoulders square, eyes forward. The old inmate watched him go, murmuring, "You hold that line, soldier." Elijah was led down a long corridor to an interrogation room. His reflection flickered in the glass, uniform wrinkled. Blood dried on one sleeve, eyes still calm. Two officers sat across from him. One of them, the younger cop from the park, refused to meet his gaze. The older one began, "Sergeant Moore, we've reviewed the footage. You're claiming the man was a veteran suffering an episode?" Elijah nodded. "Earl Hopkins, Vietnam. He needed help." The older officer leaned back, exhaling. "Your composure. It's something. Even in cuffs." "It's my duty to remain composed," Elijah said simply. "I serve those who cannot speak for themselves." The room fell silent for a beat, until a knock came on the door. The chief stepped in, holding a phone, his face pale. "We might have a problem," he muttered. This story's already spreading online. And apparently, he paused. The army's calling. Elijah looked up, surprised but calm. Someone high-ranking saw the video. They're sending a representative from DC down here. The younger cop finally glanced up. Who? The chief hesitated. A general. Elijah didn't move, but inside, a faint flicker of emotion stirred. Not relief, not anger, just a quiet disbelief. He had spent years honoring men of rank and memory, never expecting any of them to stand for him. He was escorted back to his cell. The old inmate gave him a knowing look. Word travels fast, huh? Elijah sat down again, clasping his hands together. The sound of rain began to patter against the small barred window above. It reminded him of footsteps, soft, constant, eternal. The same rhythm he had walked to for years, guarding the tomb. He whispered to himself. Never off duty. At precisely 0600 hours. Inside a Pentagon office that smelled faintly of old leather and burnt coffee. Major General Nathan Halverson watched the same viral video for the third time. The grainy footage showed a uniformed man kneeling beside a trembling veteran, one hand on his shoulder, before the flash of a taser struck him down. Halverson leaned back slowly. His square jaw tightened. The emblem on the wall behind him, U.S. Army Old Guard, 3rd Infantry Regiment, gleamed under the morning light. Is this confirmed? He asked. A lieutenant stood nearby, tablet in hand. Yes, sir. The man in the video is Staff Sergeant Elijah Moore, former sentinel at the Tomb of the Unknown Soldier. Honorably discharged last year. Halverson exhaled through his nose. Arrested for helping a veteran. Incredible. He rose, crossing to the window overlooking the Pentagon courtyard. Below, rows of soldiers moved in formation, disciplined, synchronized, alive with purpose. Watching them, Halverson's voice softened, almost like a whisper. I trained more myself, quiet, unshakable. One of the best I've ever seen. The lieutenant hesitated. Sir, should we? Book me on the next flight to Tennessee, Halverson interrupted. This man served under my watch. If the world's going to drag his name through the mud, I'll look him in the eye first. By noon, the rain in Tennessee had turned the county jail parking lot into a mirror of gray puddles. Inside, officers whispered among themselves. The atmosphere taut, uneasy. Word had spread. A general was coming. When the black SUV arrived, the tension broke like a taut string. 2 military police officers stepped out first, followed by a tall figure in full-service uniform, chest lined with ribbons. Posture like granite, General Halverson. The local sheriff hurried forward, his nervous smile thin as paper. General, it's an honor. I wasn't expecting. Halverson cut him off with a firm handshake. I'm not here for pleasantries, Sheriff. I'm here for one of my men. Inside, Elijah sat quietly in the same cell, hands resting on his knees. The old inmate from before whispered, They said a general's here. For you. Elijah looked up confused. For me? Moments later, the heavy door creaked open. Halverson stepped in, boots echoing against concrete. The 2 soldiers locked eyes, one still wearing the invisible discipline of service, the other carrying the weight of command. Sergeant Moore, Halverson said. Voice low but resonant, Elijah rose instinctively, standing at attention. Sir, Halverson studied him for a moment, the dried blood on his sleeve, the faint mark on his wrist, and the same stillness he remembered from Arlington. At ease. Soldier, Halverson said softly. Elijah relaxed slightly. Didn't expect to see you again, sir. Nor I, under these circumstances. Halverson turned to the sheriff, who stood awkwardly nearby. I've reviewed the footage. This man did nothing wrong. He rendered aid to a veteran in distress. That's not an arrest. That's an act of service. The sheriff swallowed. General, with all respect, procedure. Procedure? Halverson snapped. You humiliated a sentinel of the tomb, a man who has spent his life honoring those who never came home. And you tasered him like a criminal. Silence filled the room. The younger officer who had fired the taser looked down, guilt flickering across his face. Halverson turned back to Elijah. You kept your composure. You didn't fight back. Wasn't my duty to resist, sir, Elijah replied. My duty ended when they took the veteran away. The general nodded slowly, his eyes glinting with something between pride and sorrow. You never stopped being a guard, did you? No, sir. Some things don't end when the orders do. A long pause stretched between them, heavy with unspoken understanding. Finally, Halverson faced the sheriff again. I'll be taking him with me. Immediate release. Sir, that's highly irregular. Then consider this your formal order from the Department of the Army, Halverson said, sliding a folded document from his coat. The sheriff hesitated, then nodded quickly. The cell door buzzed open. The sound of metal sliding against metal echoed like a drumbeat of freedom. As Elijah stepped out, Halverson placed a firm hand on his shoulder. You held the line, son. You did what we trained you to do. Serve with honor. Elijah met his eyes. I wasn't serving the army, sir. Just a man who needed help. Halverson's jaw flexed. That's the same thing, Sergeant. They walked out together into the rain. Cameras flashed from across the street, reporters, locals, strangers who'd seen the video and come to witness the aftermath. Halverson ignored them all. He opened the car door for Elijah. Let's get you home. As they drove off, Elijah glanced out the window, at the wet pavement, at the world that had briefly mistaken him for a villain. The general's voice broke the silence. There's going to be fallout from this, Halverson said. But there's also going to be respect. The army takes care of its own. Elijah didn't answer. He just stared at the horizon, the rain streaking down the glass like slow tears in the reflection. He saw himself not as a prisoner or even a hero. Just a soldier, still guarding, still silent. The plane touched down at Reagan National Airport just after dawn. Through the oval window, Elijah Moore saw the soft glow of sunrise breaking over the Potomac, gold light cutting through the mist like a promise. He hadn't been back to Washington in a year. Not since he'd folded his uniform for what he thought would be the last time. Now, that same uniform lay neatly pressed on his lap. The general had said little during the flight. Only a few quiet words that echoed louder than any speech. Arlington is waiting. When they arrived, the cemetery stretched before them like a sea of white marble, endless rows of headstones, each standing in perfect silence. The morning air was cool, carrying the faint scent of rain and cut grass. Elijah stepped out of the car, his boots touching the familiar stone path that led toward the tomb of the unknown soldier. The rhythmic click of his heels echoed, steady, deliberate, ceremonial. Every step brought back memories at the long hours of standing motionless beneath the sun. The winter nights where frost bit through his gloves. The rain, the thunder, the tourists who never understood the silence, and the feeling, that sacred stillness when he marched before the tomb. Rifle glinting in perfect cadence, guarding men whose names the world had forgotten. Now, for the first time, he was the one being watched. A small crowd had gathered near the amphitheater, soldiers in dress blues, veterans in faded jackets, civilians with small American flags in hand. Cameras were set up, but even the reporters spoke in hushed tones. The ceremony was not for spectacle. It was for respect. General Halverson stood waiting near the platform, his uniform immaculate despite the sleepless night. As Elijah approached, the general saluted him, a gesture that made whispers ripple through the crowd. Staff Sergeant Moore, Halverson said solemnly, the Army owes you an apology, and more than that, its gratitude. Elijah returned the salute. Sir, I was just doing what any soldier would do. Halverson's voice softened. Maybe, but not every soldier would do it in front of a world ready to misunderstand him. The general turned toward the crowd. This man once guarded the tomb of the unknown soldier. When he saw a fellow veteran fall, he did what those buried here would have wanted. He acted with honor, with compassion. And that's why he's standing here today. The band began to play softly, the low hum of Amazing Grace carried by a single trumpet. It drifted through the morning air, wrapping around the headstones, trembling with memory. Elijah's chest tightened. He remembered the last time he'd heard that song, at a funeral for a friend who never came back from Afghanistan. He swallowed hard, eyes glistening as he looked at the tomb ahead. 3 sentinels stood guard, the brothers he once trained, their faces stone calm, rifles resting against their shoulders. One of them stepped forward, motioned silently, and offered Elijah a white-gloved salute. Without thinking, Elijah returned it. The gesture wasn't in the program. It wasn't part of any formal script. But it was the truest thing in that moment. A quiet acknowledgement between soldiers who understood that duty doesn't end when the ceremony does. General Halverson placed a small metal case in Elijah's hand. Inside lay a silver coin, engraved with the insignia of the old guard, and beneath it, 5 simple words: honor is its own reward. Elijah stared at it, the metal glinting in the light. "Sir, I don't deserve this." Halverson smiled faintly. "You don't get to decide that, Sergeant. The men beneath this stone do." A long silence followed. Wind brushed across the marble, carrying the faint rustle of leaves and the whisper of distant flags. Elijah stepped closer to the tomb, his reflection faint on its polished surface. He placed the coin at its base, beside the eternal wreath. "For all of them," he murmured. And for a brief second, just long enough to feel it, the air seemed to still, as if the fallen themselves had bowed in silent gratitude. The trumpet's final note hung in the air. Then, silence. Elijah turned, walking back toward the crowd, his boots echoing once again in steady rhythm. He didn't march anymore, but the discipline never left his stride. Every eye followed him, but he didn't seek recognition. The honor wasn't his alone. It belonged to the nameless, to the forgotten, to every man who had stood guard and never faltered. As the sun rose higher, its light washed over the white marble fields, countless stones shining like stars in daylight. And in that vast, sacred stillness, Elijah Moore, once a prisoner, now a soldier reborn, finally felt free. 2 weeks had passed since the ceremony at Arlington, yet Elijah Moore still woke before dawn. As if the changing of the guard was waiting for him somewhere in the dark, his small home in Coatham, Tennessee was quiet, just the ticking of the clock and the rustle of wind through half-open blinds. The folded uniform sat on the dresser, its creases perfect, untouched since that day. On the kitchen table, a dozen envelopes lay in a neat pile. Some were from veterans groups, others from strangers who'd seen the footage and wanted to say thank you. But most bore the same emblem: major news networks, requests, interviews, talk shows. Book deals. The world, it seemed, wanted him to speak. He hadn't replied to any of them, until one letter caught his eye. Plain, handwritten, no logo. "Mr. Moore, my father served in Korea. He used to tell me about the silence at Arlington, how it meant something deeper than words. I promise this won't be a circus. Just one honest conversation. Sarah Lynn, Veteran Affairs Correspondent, PBS." Elijah read it twice, then a third time. Something about the handwriting felt sincere, the kind of care soldiers use when writing home. By evening, he called her. They met in a small local studio the next morning. No audience, no applause. Just 2 chairs, 1 camera, and a single soft light cutting across the room like morning sunlight through blinds. Sarah Lynn was calm, mid-30s, dark hair tied neatly, wearing a simple navy blazer. She shook Elijah's hand firmly, like someone who understood what respect meant. "Thank you for agreeing to this," she said. Elijah nodded. "Didn't really plan to. Just figured it's time to clear some things up. The camera light blinked red. Sarah smiled faintly. Staff Sergeant Elijah Moore, you became the center of national attention after a video went viral. A soldier helping an old veteran, only to be arrested moments later. What went through your mind that day? Elijah leaned forward, elbows resting on his knees. His voice was low, steady. Honestly, nothing heroic. I saw someone fall. Training kicked in. That's all. Sarah's eyes softened. And when they pulled the taser? He paused, jaw tightening. It wasn't anger I felt. It was disappointment. Not in them, just in what we've forgotten. We're supposed to look after each other. Doesn't matter the uniform, the age, or the sight of the badge. Silence filled the space. Even the camera seemed to hesitate. Sarah looked down at her notes, then back at him. People are calling you a hero, Sergeant. He shook his head slightly. Heroes don't get handcuffed. They don't end up trending online. I was just doing what I was trained to do. To serve. Sarah tilted her head. Do you regret stepping in? Elijah met her gaze, calm, unwavering. Not for a second. The simplicity of the answer hung in the air. After a pause, Sarah asked, when you stood again at the tomb of the unknown soldier, what did you feel? Elijah's expression changed, something softer, almost reverent. It's strange. The unknowns. They can't speak. But when you stand there long enough, you realize silence can say everything. Sarah lowered her pen. You think that silence means something we've lost? He nodded. Maybe. We live in a world that shouts. Everyone wants to be seen, to be loud, to be right. But the men we guard, they gave everything and asked for nothing. That's the kind of quiet I want to live with. For a long moment, neither spoke. The hum of the lights filled the room. Sarah broke the silence softly. You know, when the general came to get you, it reminded a lot of people of what honor still means. Elijah looked down, a faint smile tracing his lips. General Halverson. He didn't come for a headline. He came because he remembered what it meant to lead from the front. The interview ended there. No grand speech. No dramatic music. Just the sound of the camera powering down and Sarah saying, "Thank you, Sergeant, for your service and for reminding us what it still looks like." That night, the segment aired quietly on PBS. No viral hashtags. No flashing graphics. Just the story of a soldier who kept his word when the world forgot how. Elijah watched it from his porch, the glow of the television flickering through the open window. The final shot was him sitting beneath the oaks at Arlington. Staring at the tomb in silence, he turned off the TV. The night outside was still, full of the same quiet he'd always guarded. For the first time in months, he finally exhaled. It started 3 days after the PBS interview aired. At first, Elijah didn't notice. His phone buzzed a little more than usual. Emails came in from unknown names. And his old army buddy sent short texts. Saw the interview. Proud of you, man. Then came the comments. Someone clipped a 10-second portion of the broadcast, just him saying, "Heroes don't get handcuffed." Out of context, it spread like wildfire. Headlines twisted it into something else. Disgraced guard slams law enforcement on national TV. Tomb sentinel turns on his country. By the end of the week, his name was everywhere again, only this time. It wasn't respect he was receiving. At the local diner, the waitress hesitated before taking his order. "You're that soldier, right?" she asked. Elijah smiled faintly. "Used to be." She nodded slowly, unsure whether to shake his hand or walk away. On the TV behind the counter, a talk show host was ranting about performative patriotism, gesturing to Elijah's picture. He finished his coffee in silence. By the time he stepped outside, a pickup truck rolled past. A man leaned out the window and shouted, "Hey, hero. You think you're better than the cops now?" The words stung more than the tone. Elijah didn't answer. He just watched the taillights disappear into the afternoon haze. That night, the internet swarmed. Some defended him. Others tore him apart. Photos from his military service resurfaced. Old posts were twisted into conspiracy fodder. One headline read, "Was the Tomb Guard's arrest staged for sympathy?" The same people who had once called him a hero were now calling him a fraud. He tried ignoring it. Turned off his phone. But the noise still seeped through, the hum of talking heads, the clatter of opinions, the endless war of words. By midnight, there was a knock at his door. It was General Halverson. The old soldier looked weary, still wearing his service jacket. "You holding up?" he asked quietly. Elijah exhaled. "Trying to." Halverson stepped inside, glancing at the muted television. Elijah's face plastered across it again. "You can't control the mob," he said. "They'll build you up, then tear you down. It's what they do." "I didn't ask for any of it," Elijah muttered. "I know. But you stepped into something bigger than you. Truth is, when you serve the uniform long enough, you forget the world doesn't speak its language anymore." Elijah looked at him. "So what do I do?" Halverson's voice was steady. "You do what you've always done. Stand your post." The next day, he went for a run before sunrise. The cool air burned his lungs. The rhythm of his boots hitting the pavement kept him centered. Each breath was a reminder: discipline, control, calm. When he returned, a letter sat on his porch. No sender, just his name written in blue ink. Inside was a single note: "My brother died in Iraq. Watching you stand for what's right gave me peace. Don't let them take that away from you." No signature. Just those words. Elijah folded the note carefully, slid it into his wallet, and smiled faintly for the first time in days. But the storm hadn't passed. By afternoon, news vans lined the edge of his street. Cameras pointed toward his house. Microphones stretched like bayonets. "Sergeant Moore, do you regret your comments? Were you politically motivated? Do you have a message for the police department?" He said nothing. Just walked past them, calm, unshaken, like a soldier on parade. A young reporter ran after him, shouting, "Why stay silent? Don't you want people to hear your side?" Elijah stopped, turned slowly, and looked her in the eye. "My side?" he said, quietly. "Ma'am, there's no sides in honor." Then he walked away. The clip aired that evening. And for once, the noise softened. People began to listen again. Because silence, the kind that came from conviction, had spoken louder than every voice online. That night, Elijah sat on his porch again, the letter in his hand. The crickets sang in the dark, and the air smelled like rain. Somewhere out there, people were still arguing about him, but it no longer mattered. He'd stood his post, and that was enough. It was a quiet Sunday morning. When the call came, Elijah was polishing the metal case he kept tucked away in his study, the same metals he never displayed, only cleaned when his thoughts grew heavy. The phone buzzed once, twice, and then a voice answered on the other side, deep and official. "Staff Sergeant Elijah Moore?" "Yes, sir. This is Colonel Reeves from the Office of Military Affairs, Washington, D.C. The President's Chief of Staff would like to extend an invitation. The Commander-in-Chief has seen your story." Elijah froze. "An invitation for what?" "To the White House, Sergeant. The nation could use your voice right now." The next 48 hours felt like a blur. An unmarked black SUV picked him up before dawn. The air was cold, and Washington loomed gray and solemn beneath the clouds. Flags hung motionless across Pennsylvania Avenue, and for the first time in months, Elijah felt the same stillness he used to guard at Arlington, a silence filled with purpose. When they led him through the marble corridors of the West Wing, he caught glimpses of portraits, presidents, generals, history framed in gold. His boots echoed faintly on the floor. every step a reminder that he was still, at heart, a soldier, not a symbol. Inside the Roosevelt room, 2 men and a woman waited for him. The Chief of Staff extended her hand. "Sergeant Moore, thank you for coming." He nodded respectfully. "Ma'am." She gestured for him to sit. "You've become the face of integrity in a time when people don't agree on what that even means. The President believes your story could remind this country what duty looks like." Elijah frowned slightly. "Ma'am, with respect, I'm just a guard who followed orders and helped a man in need. That's exactly why we want to hear from you." She turned on a small screen. A clip played, the viral footage of Elijah refusing to speak to reporters, then his line, "There's no sides in honor." Silence filled the room. "That line," she said softly, "has been quoted in congressional debates, sermons, even classrooms. People are listening." Elijah leaned back, uneasy. "I didn't mean to start anything." "Sometimes meaning doesn't matter," she replied. "Character does." After a pause, Colonel Reeves slid a document across the table. "This is an offer to return to service," he said. "Not as a ceremonial guard, as an instructor at the Sentinel training program. Teaching the next generation about discipline, duty, and composure under pressure. The President believes it's time we restore the tomb's legacy, through you." Elijah looked at the paper, then up at them. "And if I say no?" "Then you walk out of here as a free man, Sergeant," Reeves said. "No cameras, no obligations. Just your life back." He stared at the emblem on the header, the bald eagle, wings outstretched, and thought of the old veteran, Earl Hopkins, saluting through his tears. Thought of the general who'd stood up for him. Thought of the letter he kept in his wallet. "Don't let them take that away from you." Finally, he said quietly, "I'll do it. But I'll do it my way, no speeches, no photo ops. Just training soldiers to remember what that silence means." The Chief of Staff smiled. "That's all we ask, Sergeant Moore." That afternoon, he stood on the White House balcony beside Colonel Reeves, looking out toward the Washington Monument. The wind carried the faint sound of tourists and traffic, but above it all was a hush, the kind he recognized from years of guarding the unknowns. Reeves spoke quietly. "You know, most men come here chasing power." Elijah shook his head. "I came here to remember why we serve." Reeves smiled faintly. "Then you're exactly who we need." Later that night, as the SUV drove him back to his hotel, Elijah looked out the window at the city lights reflecting off the Potomac. The glow reminded him of candles at Arlington, lined up like silent sentinels in the dark. He thought about how everything had spiraled from one simple act, helping an old man stand tall again. And how that one act had led him here, to the center of a nation searching for its conscience. He didn't know if he could fix anything. But he knew this. He would guard the idea of honor itself. The way he once guarded the tomb, not with a rifle, not with a salute, but with example. The sky was still a shade of blue-black. When Elijah arrived at Arlington National Cemetery, mist curled around the white marble headstones, and the first thin gold of morning light began to brush across the horizon. The tomb stood silently as it always had, immutable, untouched by politics or noise. Elijah stood at the edge of the plaza, dressed not in the ceremonial uniform this time, but in the instructor's blues. A patch rested on his shoulder, Sentinel Instructor. It felt heavier than any medal he'd ever worn. Behind him, 24 young soldiers stood in formation. Their faces were tense, focused, their boots polished, rifles gleaming. For weeks, he had trained them not just to march, but to feel the silence of this place. Today, they would march the plaza for the first time. He turned, scanning their lines. "You don't just walk out there," he said quietly. "You become part of it. Every breath you take, every step, it's for those who no longer can. This isn't about you. It's about them." No one replied. They didn't need to dot as the sun climbed higher. The faint sound of footsteps echoed through the plaza. Dignitaries, military officials, and veterans slowly filled the seating area. Cameras were nowhere to be seen. Elijah had made that clear. This was not a show. This was a promise. And then, in the front row, a frail figure appeared, helped by two attendants. Earl Hopkins. His old army jacket was pressed and clean, and on his lapel gleamed a silver pin, the unit crest he'd worn in Vietnam. When Elijah saw him, his jaw tightened, but not from nerves. It was pride. A trumpet note pierced the morning air, sharp and pure. The honor guard began their slow, measured march. He watched his recruits move with precision, their boots striking the marble in perfect unison. Their rifles caught the sunlight like a mirror, and the entire crowd fell into reverent silence. For the first time since everything had happened, Elijah felt the weight lift from his chest. This was why he'd returned. Not for politics. Not for praise. For this silence. "Ladies and gentlemen," the announcer said softly through the speakers. "Today, before the changing of the guard, we honor a man whose quiet courage reminded us what duty means, not through words, but through a single act of compassion." All eyes turned to Earl Hopkins. He stood for this country long ago. And when he fell, someone reached out a hand. Elijah stepped forward as two cadets helped Earl to his feet. The old veteran's hand trembled slightly as Elijah offered his arm, just like he had on that day. The entire plaza stood. Hats were removed. Salutes rose like a wave of memory. Earl whispered hoarsely, "Never thought I'd see this again, son." Elijah's voice was quiet. "You never stopped deserving it." A citation was read aloud. Earl received a folded flag and a Medal of Honor for service long forgotten. The crowd erupted in applause, not loud, but steady, like a heartbeat. When it was Elijah's turn to speak, he stepped to the podium, sunlight on his face. He didn't have a speech. He didn't need one. "Honor doesn't belong to the loudest," he said simply. "It belongs to those who stand when no one is watching. That's all." Then he saluted the tomb. No cameras. No rehearsed lines. Just silence. After the ceremony, as the plaza emptied, Elijah walked with Earl along the gravel path. The old man's steps were slow but steady. "You gave me my salute back," Earl murmured. Elijah shook his head. "You never lost it." They paused beneath a line of oaks. A breeze rustled through the branches, carrying the faint sound of taps being played somewhere in the distance. Earl looked up at him. "You'll make a damn good teacher." Elijah chuckled softly. "I'll try." When Earl was driven away, Elijah returned alone to the plaza. He placed his hand on the cold stone of the tomb, the same place he'd guarded countless nights, through rain, wind, and silence. For a moment, he didn't think of titles, ranks, or news headlines. He thought of the unknown soldiers who'd never gone home, of the brothers he'd buried, of the weight of every footstep taken on this ground. Then, with calm precision, he turned and took his place at the plaza's edge. Not as a guard, not as a symbol, but as a man who had learned that honor isn't something you wear. It's something you keep. And when the next young guard marched out, Elijah smiled faintly. The silence had a new keeper now.